After her in-laws cut off her hair, the loner sheriff said, "You're coming home with me." The first thing I noticed was the scissors. Not her, not the three Crane brothers standing in a loose half-circle behind her in the road. The scissors first, big shearing scissors, the kind you use on livestock, lying in the mud near her left boot where somebody had dropped them. One blade was dark at the tip, not rust. I'd come out of the jail at 7:30 because Cleet Binns had forgot to put the coffee off the boil again, and the smell was burning the whole front office. That's the only reason I was standing on the porch at that particular moment. Otherwise, I'd have been at my desk, and none of it would have started the way it did. She was in the middle of Garnet Street, kneeling. Not like she'd fallen, deliberately kneeling, arms around herself, head bowed. And what was left of her hair was in the dirt around her knees in loose, dark handfuls, like somebody had sheared a horse and just left the clippings where they lay. Ellis Crane was the oldest. He was standing closest to her with his thumbs in his belt, hat back, easy about it the way a man is easy when he's done a thing and doesn't expect to be questioned. Beside him were his brothers Holt and Rue, and behind them her wagon, a small buckboard with a single roan mare, the kind of rig a woman manages alone. The roan was skittish, shifting against the tie rail, head jerking. I came down the porch steps. I didn't run. I've learned not to run toward things I don't yet understand. You run toward something, you commit yourself before you know what you're committing to. I walked. Steady and deliberate, because when a sheriff walks toward you deliberate, most men read it right. Ellis looked over at me and smiled. That's the Crane way. They smile when they think they own the ground they're standing on. "Morning, Virgil," he said. I didn't answer him. I walked to the woman and crouched down. She was young, maybe 26, 27. I couldn't see her face yet. Her head was still bowed. What was left of her hair was close-cropped and uneven, hacked more than cut, some patches left longer than others the way an impatient man does a job he's only doing to humiliate rather than do well. There was a thin line of blood, where the scissors had caught the skin above her left ear. I put my hand flat on the ground next to hers, not touching, just there. "You hurt anywhere besides your head," I said. She raised her face then. Gray eyes, that was the first thing I noticed about her face. Not the color of grief or rain, actual gray, clear and light, the kind of eyes that take in more than they give back. Her jaw was set hard and her lips were pressed together, and she was not crying. She had been maybe earlier, there was dried salt on her cheeks, but she wasn't now. She was holding herself together with both hands, and she was doing it well. "No," she said. Her voice was even, I marked that. I stood up and turned around to Ellis Crane. "Whose woman is she?" I said. Ellis spread his hands. She was Denny's wife. Denny passed in October. Denny Crane was the fourth brother, 22 years old, dead of a fever before the first frost. I'd known Denny. He was the only decent one of the four. "Denny's widow," I said, "not Denny's property." Ellis's smile held, but something went out of the back of his eyes. "Now, Virgil, this is family business." "It's in the middle of my street," I said. "That makes it my business." "She took Denny's silver," Holt said. "He was to my left, and I kept him in the edge of my vision. The pieces his mother gave him before she died, she had 'em packed in her wagon." The woman said from the ground behind me, "They were a wedding gift to both of us." She was leaving, Ellis said, like that settled it. "With Crane property, we retrieved what belonged to us, and we gave her something to remember to stay honest by." He said it like it was nothing, like what he'd done was the same as changing a fence line. I looked at him for a moment. I'm not a man who fills silences. I've spent 23 years wearing a badge in 3 different territories, and I have learned that silence, held right, is the most useful tool a lawman carries. Men will talk into it. They will explain themselves. They will tell you exactly who they are if you simply refuse to save them from the quiet. Ellis Crane talked into it. "She's got no family in this county," he said. "Nowhere to go, probably best she comes back out to the ranch and—" "She's not going back to your ranch," I said. That landed. I watched it land on all 3 of them. "Now listen here, Virgil." "I'm done listening to you," I said. "You put your hands on a widow woman in the middle of town. You cut her." I let that word sit. "You try to take her back to your property, and I'll arrest every one of you before you clear the county line. You want to come at those silver pieces through a court, you know where to find me." Ellis stared at me. He was trying to figure out where the line was, whether I'd back it or whether it was just talk. I've been studied by better men than Ellis Crane. I let him study. Fine, he said finally, but she's got nothing. No family, no money, no. I said we were done, I told him. They left. Holt gave me a long look going out, but he went. I watched until the three of them were around the corner at the end of Garnet Street, and then I turned around. She was still kneeling. She was looking at the hair in the dirt around her. Not crying, just looking at it the way a person looks at something when they're trying to decide what to make of it, what it means for what comes next. I put out my hand. She looked at it, looked up at my face, then took it and let me help her to her feet. Do you have family somewhere? I said. My mother's in Missouri. I have enough money for a train ticket if I can get to the next town without the Cranes following me. How much is enough? She told me it was enough, barely. What's your name? I said. Ada, she said. Ada Crane, Ada Colliver before. Virgil Lydd, I said. I still had her hand. I didn't realize it until she looked down at it and I let go. I'm going to take you inside and get that cut cleaned up, then we'll figure out the rest. She looked at the wagon. The roan needs water. I'll have Cleet see to her, I said. Come on. That should have been the end of it. Clean the cut, find her a room at the Widow Parsons' boarding house, make sure she got on a stage out of Garnet without the Cranes seeing her go. That's how it should have gone. A morning's problem resolved by noon. But nothing about Ada Colliver resolved by noon. Cleet Binns had been my deputy for 11 years and the worst coffee maker in the West, and he was good for exactly the two things I needed him for. He would do what I told him without asking why, and he did not rattle. I told him to see to the roan and to stay out of the front office for a spell. He went without a word. I sat Ada down at my desk. The jail had a basin and a medicine box. 23 years, you learn to keep a medicine box. And I brought them both over and set them on the corner of the desk, and I cleaned the cut above her ear with carbolic and a square of clean cloth. She sat still through it. She didn't flinch away from the carbolic, which stings like fire, and she didn't make any sound. She held her eyes level and forward while I worked, and once or twice she breathed out slow through her nose, that particular breath of someone choosing not to react. There's a discipline in that. I noticed it. When I was done, she reached up and touched the close-cropped side of her head. Not distressed about it, more like a carpenter assessing the damage so he knows what he's working with. How long were you married? I said. 14 months. He was a decent man, Denny, different from those brothers. Yes, she said, he was. I put the carbolic away. I didn't ask more about Denny. That wasn't my place. The Widow Parsons has rooms, I said. She's a fair woman, I can walk you over there. Ada was looking out the front window at the street. The hair was still out there in the mud of Garnet Street, drying now in the morning sun. I'd have to get someone to clear it before it dried and blew, before children saw it. Ellis will watch the boarding house, she said. He'll know I'm there. I can make clear to Ellis. You can't be everywhere, Sheriff. She said it without rancor, just matter of fact. If I stay in town, they'll find a way. They'll wait until you're at the other end of the county, and then they'll... She stopped. She looked at her hands in her lap. Denny used to stand up to them for me without him. She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't need to. I stood at the window for a while. I could see her reflection in the glass, her profile, the short, uneven hair, the set of her jaw. She wasn't asking me for anything. She was thinking it through for herself, working out what was possible, and I got the feeling she'd been doing that alone for a long time. I have a house, I said. She looked at my reflection in the glass. 3 miles out of town. Nobody goes out there but me. The Cranes don't know it. I bought it last year under a land company name for tax reasons. I turned around. You could stay there while you figure out what comes next. I'd be in town most nights. You'd have the place to yourself. She held my eyes for a moment, reading me the way she had in the street, taking her time about it. Why, she said. It wasn't suspicious, exactly. More like she'd learned to ask the question before she assumed anything about a man's motives, and I couldn't fault her for that. Because it's what's right, I said, and because I don't back down from Ellis Crane. Something moved in those gray eyes. Not gratitude. She wasn't a woman who let you see her gratitude that easily. More like she'd just resolved something. All right, she said. I drove her out there that afternoon in my wagon with her buckboard behind us on a lead rope. 3 miles on a rutted county track that I'd ridden so many times I knew every rock by name. Through a stand of scrub oak that opened up onto 10 acres of grassland, and a house I had never once in a year thought of as anything but somewhere to sleep. Adobe and timber, 2 rooms, a linta with a good water pump, a small barn, nothing fancy, solid. She stood in the yard and looked at it. "I'll have Cleet bring out some supplies tomorrow," I said. "There's enough in the pantry for tonight." She was still looking at the house. The afternoon light was long and flat, the kind of October light that makes everything look spare and deliberate. She had one hand raised to shade her eyes and the other at her side, and her hair was still a ruin, but she stood like she was measuring the place, like she was deciding what she thought of it, not waiting for permission to decide. "I can work," she said, "for my keep. You don't owe me anything for this." "That's not why I said it." She lowered her hand and looked at me. "I need something to do. I'm not a woman who sits." I could see that, clear as anything. "Fence line on the north pasture needs work," I said. "I'll show you where." She almost smiled, just the edge of it. I drove back to town. That was the 4th of October. I didn't go out to the house for 3 days after that. I had business, a horse theft out east, a dispute between 2 ranchers over water rights that was heading fast toward something worse, and Ellis Crane to watch because I knew Ellis. He would make his move when he thought I'd stopped watching. On the 3rd day, Cleet came in from his supply run to the house and set a cloth-wrapped package on my desk. "What's that?" I said. "She sent it," he said. "She made biscuits. She said to tell you she fixed the north fence." I looked at the package. "She fixed the fence," I said, "the whole north section." Cleet shrugged in a way that meant yes, and also meant he didn't entirely understand it either. I unwrapped the cloth. Good biscuits still warm, wrapped in a square of clean flour sack. No note, no sentiment, just the biscuits. I ate one standing at my desk, and I stared out the window at Garnet Street for a while. 23 years wearing a badge. I'd eaten a lot of solitary meals, and I'd gotten used to that in the way you get used to things that don't kill you. You stop noticing the weight of it after a while. You think you have anyway. That biscuit, the deliberateness of it, the fact that she'd wrapped them in clean cloth and sent them without ceremony and fixed 30 yards of fence line in 3 days. I noticed the weight again. I told myself it was nothing. She was a widow woman with nowhere to go, and I'd done the right thing by her, and this was just the kind of woman she was: capable, practical, not inclined to sit idle and wait to be looked after. It didn't mean anything. I ate the rest of the biscuits. I went out on the 7th day. Evening coming on dark, and I had a reason, a fence question on the east end of the property I'd been meaning to deal with. That was the reason, I told myself. She was in the linta when I rode in, doing something at the workbench there. She had a lamp lit and the door open, and she heard my horse and stepped out to look, and when she saw it was me, she went back to what she was doing. Not rude, just easy, like I was expected. I put my horse up and came around to the lean-to. She was working at the pump handle. The mechanism had been stiff since I bought the place, and I'd never gotten around to it, and she'd taken it half apart and was cleaning the washers with a rag. "Where'd you learn to do that?" I said. "My father had a well," she said. "Pump went bad every spring." She put the mechanism back together and primed it and worked the handle, and clean water came up straight and even, no grinding. She looked at it with satisfaction. The same expression she'd had measuring the house that first day, not pride, exactly, just a private accounting of a thing done right. I leaned against the door frame. "Ellis been out this way?" I said. "No," she said. She was drying her hands on the rag. "A rider came up the track 2 days ago and stopped at the fence line. Sat there a while, then left." Description: tall man, bay horse, brown hat. Holt Crane, he didn't come in past the fence. "No." "Good," I said. "He was looking, not coming. I'll talk to them again." She hung the rag on a nail. "You've done enough," she said. "I don't want you spending your credit on my behalf with men like that." "My credit's my own to spend," I said. She looked at me then, straight on, that clear gray look. "Why does it matter to you?" she said. "What happens to me?" The lamp was between us on the bench, and in that light she looked less like someone who'd been through a hard thing and more just like herself, direct, steady, a little worn at the edges, but fundamentally solid. Like the house, like the pump she'd just fixed. I thought about how to answer that honestly. 23 years, I said. I've seen a lot of people get run over by men like the Cranes. Most times I could stop it. Sometimes I couldn't. Didn't stop me losing sleep over the ones I couldn't. I paused. You're one I can, that's all. She was quiet for a moment. Then, do you want supper? I didn't come to. I made too much, she said. Stew, the dear cleat left hung in the barn. She walked past me toward the house. It'll go to waste. I followed her inside. We ate at the table by the fire. The stew was good, not just good. It was the best thing I'd eaten in months, which is not as high a bar as it should be when you're eating your own cooking. But she'd done something with dried sage, and some root I didn't recognize that turned a plain deer stew into something worth sitting down for. I said so. It's just rabbit medicine, she said. What? That's what my mother called it. Wild bergamot grows along the creek here, good with game. I looked at what was left in my bowl. I've been ranching this ground for a year, I said. She almost smiled again. You're a busy man. We ate for a while without talking. Not awkward, just the natural quiet of a meal. Outside, the wind had come up and the scrub oak was moving against the side of the house, that dry scratch of branches on adobe. I'd heard it 100 nights and never thought much of it. Tonight it sounded like something. Tell me about Denny, she said. It surprised me. Usually it's the other way. The person who's grieving doesn't want to hear about it from someone who knew the person less well. But she asked it directly, looking at her bowl, and I understood. She was building him back from other people's memory of him because her own was only 14 months' worth, and that wasn't enough to hold against what the Cranes had done to her idea of who she'd married into. He was quiet, I said. Didn't take up much room the way his brothers do. I arrested Holt twice and Rue once and never once arrested Denny. He came to me once, maybe a year before he died, about a problem he was having with some stock going missing. We figured it out. He was straightforward, didn't waste words, thanked me when it was done, and that was it. I paused. I think he was embarrassed by his family. I think he'd have left if he'd had more time. She was quiet. He talked about you, I said. Once, when we were working the stock problem, he said he'd married a woman who had more sense than him and his brothers combined, and he said it the way a man says something he's genuinely proud of. I looked at her. He was right. She pressed her lips together, that was all. But the line of her shoulders changed slightly, loosened by a fraction, like something she'd been carrying a long way had been set down for just a moment. We did the dishes together. She washed, I dried. I didn't suggest it, I just picked up the cloth when she started and she didn't say anything about it. The window over the basin was dark and I could see both our reflections in it when I looked, vague and lamplit, and I looked away from that quickly. I left around 9. She stood in the doorway to see me off, arms folded against the cold. I'll come out again in a few days, I said. Check the east fence. All right, she said. I rode back to town in the dark. The trouble with Ellis Crane was that he was not stupid. He was vicious and he was petty and he thought the world owed him a debt it hadn't agreed to, but he wasn't stupid. He would figure out, given enough time, that I had Ada somewhere. The question was whether he could find out where before she was either safely gone or I didn't finish that thought. On the 14th of October, I went to see Ellis at the Crane Ranch. It's a long ride, 7 miles northwest on a road that gets rough after the Second Creek crossing. The Crane spread is big. Old money by frontier standards, which means one Crane grandfather grabbed as much land as he could hold back when the holding was easy. Ellis managed it mean and tight, and it showed in the faces of the men who worked for him. That particular blankness you see when men are kept by fear rather than decency. Ellis was on the porch when I rode in. He'd seen me coming up the road. He always positioned himself high when he could, a small man's habit, though Ellis wasn't physically small. Virgil, he said, what brings you all the way out here? I want to be clear about something, I said. I didn't get off my horse. It's a deliberate thing. Staying mounted means the conversation is brief, means I'm not staying, means this is business, not a visit. Ada Colliver is under my protection. You sent Holt out to look for her, which is fine. Looking isn't a crime. If any of you sets foot on property associated with me, that's a different matter. Ellis smiled that same easy smile. You put yourself between a man and his family business. She's not your family, I said. She was Denny's wife and Denny is dead. She took silver. Take it to Judge Harlan, I said. File a property claim. If you're right, the court will say so. I let him hear what I wasn't saying, that I didn't think he was right. But you do not touch her again, you do not go near her, you understand me clearly. The smile stayed, but his jaw had tightened under it. You're making a lot of noise over a woman you barely know. What I do and why I do it is my concern, I said. We clear. A long pause, then clear. I rode back to town. I didn't entirely believe him, but I needed him to know I meant it, and now he knew. Whatever he decided to do with that knowledge, at least he'd make it knowing. The next 2 weeks, I went out to the house every 2 or 3 days. I told myself it was to check on the property and to keep an eye out for signs of the cranes. That was true enough to hold on to. But there was more to it than that, and I knew it by then, just didn't examine it too closely. She had made the place into something I hadn't known how to make it. Not by changing much, the furniture was still mine, everything in the same rooms. It was more in the details. A braid of dried herbs above the stove. The water pump working smooth. A small kitchen garden she'd started along the south wall with starts she'd somehow gotten from somewhere. A new set of window latches that closed properly against the wind instead of rattling loose. The house smelled different. Not like a house that a tired man used for sleeping anymore, like a place. One evening I got there and found she'd been working the south fence, the worst stretch, the one I'd been meaning to fix since spring. 200 yards of it post to post, all done. She was still out there when I came up the track, hammering the last wire fast. She had on a man's coat, too big, one of mine from the barn hook, and she had her close-cropped hair pushed back with a piece of rag, and there was dirt on her jaw, and she was working that fence the way I'd seen a man work who needed the doing of it to settle something. I got down off my horse and came over and held the post while she drove the last staple. She stepped back and looked at the line of it, level and clean. You shouldn't be doing this work, I said, not scolding, genuinely. You said the fence needed doing. I meant I'd. You've got a county to keep, she said. I've got time and hands. She looked at me sidelong. Unless you'd rather I sat inside and waited to feel saved. That landed. She said it without heat, just matter of fact, and I felt the accuracy of it. The assumptions I'd been carrying about what a widow woman in her position needed, what I was supposed to be doing for her. No, I said, I wouldn't. She gathered up the wire tools. I carried the post driver back to the barn. That evening I told her about the first time I'd worn a badge. 23 years old in a territory I'd only been in 3 months, a town called Perdita, and I'd been more afraid than I had any right to be for a lawman. I don't usually tell that story. I've told it maybe twice in my life. But she listened the way she did everything, direct, attending, not waiting for me to finish so she could say something, actually listening. And when I was done she nodded and said, the good ones always are. Afraid, I mean. The ones who aren't are the ones you watch out for. She said it plain, like it was just an observation, not comfort, just the truth as she saw it. It sat differently than comfort would have. I went back to town that night thinking about things I hadn't thought about in a long time. On the 28th of October, Ellis made his move. I was east of town on the water rights trouble, which had indeed become something worse. A shooting, not fatal, between the 2 ranchers' hired hands. I was out there 2 days sorting it, sleeping under a wagon. When I got back to Garnet, Cleet was at the jail door before I'd gotten my horse unsaddled. Crane and his brothers went out East Road yesterday afternoon, he said. All 3 of them. The East Road. That wasn't the track to the house, but it was the road that cut behind the scrub oak, the one where a rider who knew the land well enough could come in on the house from the blind side. I didn't wait to saddle another horse. I rode straight out. The sun was down by the time I got there. The house had light in the windows, which meant she was inside. I came up the track fast, and 2 horses I didn't recognize were tied at the fence, and my heart was in my chest cavity like something trying to get out. The door was locked from the inside. I knocked Ada its Virgil. A long pause. Then the bar being lifted, the door opening a crack and one gray eye in the gap, and then the door opening the rest of the way. She had a shotgun, my shotgun, from the rack above the stove. She was holding it the right way, level and easy, and the muzzle was down because she'd identified me. They came, she said. How many? Ellis and Rue. Holt wasn't with them. They came through the tree line on the south side just past dark. She stepped back. I came in and she put the bar back. I heard the horses. I bolted the door and got the gun, and I told Ellis if he broke the door I'd shoot through it. She paused. He believed me. Are they still out there? I don't know. They were there an hour ago. I checked the shutters all latched. The linta was clear when I went through the back. The barn, the yard, the tree line. Nobody. They'd gone. But they'd been there and they'd tried the door, and she had held the house alone for an hour with a shotgun and a bolt and whatever nerve she carried in that slight frame of hers, which was evidently considerable. I came back inside. She was sitting at the table. She'd set the shotgun on the table beside her, and she was looking at the lamp flame. Not shaken. She was past shaken, I think, into the particular steady that sometimes comes after you've held something terrible at bay long enough. She had both hands flat on the table. I sat down across from her. We stayed like that a while. I'm not leaving, she said. I looked at her. You're going to say I should go to Missouri, she said. Sooner rather than later while I still can, and you'd be right. She looked at me straight. I'm not leaving. I waited. I was going to, she said. The day you found me in the street, all I wanted was to get to Missouri and not look back, and that's still sensible, I know that. She looked at the lamp. But I've been sitting here this past hour thinking about what I'm actually going home to. My mother's house, sleeping in a narrow bed in a room with my two nieces, being a widow woman nobody knows what to do with, she breathed. And then I've been thinking about this place. I didn't say anything. It's the first place I've felt safe since Denny died, she said. Maybe before Denny died even, the Crane Ranch was never, she stopped. I don't want to run any more, Virgil. She said my name, just my name. Ada, I said. I know you don't, she started. I'm going to deal with Ellis tomorrow, I said. Permanently, he came onto my property. I'll arrest him for it. She shook her head slightly. That's not what I'm talking about. I knew it wasn't. I'd known it since she said my name. I'm not easy to live with, I said. It was the most honest thing I had available. I've been alone a long time and I've got habits on me like barnacles. I work all hours. I don't talk much except when I do, and then you can't stop me. I've got a county that'll always need more of me than I've got to give. She held my eyes while I said all that. I know what you are, she said simply. I've been watching you for 3 weeks. That's when she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Not dramatic, just her hand over my hand, her palm warm against my knuckles, and she left it there and she looked at me, and the lamp was between us and the fire was low, and the wind was at the shutters. I turned my hand over under hers and held on. I arrested Ellis Crane the next morning for criminal trespass, Holton Rue for conspiracy to intimidate a protected witness, which was a stretch of the statutes, but one that Judge Harlan, who did not like the Cranes, let stand. Ellis did 60 days. The property claim on the silver went to court in November, and Ada proved the pieces were a wedding gift with 2 witnesses from her home county in Missouri who sent depositions, and the judge dismissed the claim. None of that resolved everything. The Cranes still had the ranch and the land and the grudge, and a man like Ellis Crane doesn't change his nature because of 60 days in a jail cell. But he learned something in those 60 days. He learned that I would follow through. That I had followed through twice now and had the disposition to keep doing it. There are men who, once they understand that, shift their arithmetic and find someone else to wrong. Ellis was that kind, underneath all his talk. Most bullies are when you press them to the counting. Ada stayed. She stayed through the winter, which was hard. The worst cold snap I'd seen in a decade, cattle dying on the upper range, roads shut for 2 weeks in February. She stayed through the spring, the mud and the melt and the creek running over its banks, and the kitchen garden she'd started along the south wall coming up slow and deliberate through the dark soil. She stayed through a summer that was dry in the middle and wet at the end, and through another autumn. We got married the next October. A year to the month from the morning, I came off the porch and found her in the street. It was a small thing. Judge Harlan and Cleet Binns and the widow Parsons, who had come to like Ada considerably in the months Ada had been doing her shopping and such in town. We walked out of the courthouse into a cold, bright morning, and Ada put her arm through mine, and we walked down Garnet Street to the livery where we'd left the wagon, and a few people we knew called out and waved, and that was enough. That was plenty. Her hair grew back. I didn't make anything of it when it did, didn't point at it or mark it, but I noticed. Through the winter it came in dark and thick, longer every month, and by spring she was braiding it back the way she'd been wearing it in the photograph she had of herself from before, the one she'd been carrying in a tin box in the buckboard the day I met her. By summer, it was down past her shoulders. She didn't talk about what Ellis had done to it, and neither did I. But sometimes when she'd come in from the garden or from work and unpinned it, and it fell loose, I'd see her run her hand through it once fast, the way you might touch something you'd thought you'd lost. What I know about the years I spent alone, the long stretch of them, the cold breakfasts and the empty house and the county's work, and the bedroll under the wagon, and the particular silence of a life nobody depended on you for. What I know is that I didn't understand how much it weighed until she was there. Until the house had herbs above the stove, and a pump that worked smooth, and a woman's voice in it at night, asking me to tell her something, any small thing from the day, because she wanted to hear about what the world looked like from where I stood. I'll tell you what she did that first winter. January, the worst of the cold snap. We'd lost 14 head in 3 days, and the temperature wasn't going to lift for another week, and I came home one night wrung out and with nothing left. I'd been up 30-some hours, and I'd ridden 15 miles in the cold, and the horse was done, and I was done. I came through the door, and I sat down in the chair by the fire, and I did not have the wherewithal to take my coat off. She came over. She took the hat off my head and set it on the peg. She pulled the coat off my shoulders and hung it beside the hat. She brought the chair from the other side of the fire and set it beside mine, and she sat down, and she took my hand in both of hers and held it, and she didn't say a word. She just held my hand there in the firelight while the cold came off me, and the fire worked on my boots, and after a while I closed my eyes and slept in the chair, still holding her hand. I woke up in the night and the fire was banked low, and she was still there in her chair, asleep herself, and my hand was still in both of hers. I sat there for a while in the quiet and the low light, and I thought, this is what I didn't know I needed, not to be saved, not to have the hard thing taken away. Just this, a good woman who stays, who chooses to be here, who holds on when holding on is the whole of what's needed. That's not a small thing, that's not nothing. Cleet retired the year Ada, and I had been married 3 years, and I had a young deputy after that, a man named Teller who was green and serious, and reminded me of myself at that age in ways that were sometimes useful and sometimes exhausting. He asked me once, riding back from a call on the east side of the county, how I'd known to trust my judgment in a particular situation. He was asking about the work, about policing. He wanted a rule or a formula. I thought about how to answer him honestly. You pay attention long enough, I said. Things tell you what they are. He nodded like he was filing it away. Then, your wife, is it true she held off the Crane brothers herself? For an hour, I said, with a shotgun and a bolt and not much else. Teller said. He thought about that. You knew when you took her and what kind of woman she was. I hadn't, not really, not the whole of it. I'd known she wasn't crying in the street. I'd known she had a level voice and gray eyes that took in more than they gave back. I'd known she asked why before she agreed to anything. That was all I'd had. You read what you can, I said, then you trust it. He seemed satisfied with that. We rode the rest of the way in quiet. Ada is out in the kitchen garden this morning as I'm putting this down the way I am, trying to put it down right. Late October, the same low flat light it always is in October, the scrub oak gone yellow around the edges of the acreage. She's been out there an hour already, cutting back the summer's dried-out stems, getting the beds ready for cold. She's got the old wool coat on her own now, when she found at the dry goods in town and mended the lining of, and her hair is braided back, and she's working with both hands the way she always does, thorough and unhurried. She paused a moment ago and looked up at the sky and then went back to it. She didn't know I was watching. 3 years and change since that morning on Garnet Street. I was a man who'd been alone for a long time and had made a kind of peace with it, the way you do, had made it into something that felt like preference, like choice, like just the shape of things. You stop expecting anything different. You stop looking at the door. She walked through mine. Not rescued, not fixed up, not made into something I wasn't. I was the same man I'd always been, solitary, plain-spoken, better with horses than with people, more comfortable with a rifle in my hand than a kind word in my mouth. All that was still true. But she saw it, the whole of it, the good and the narrow and the worn places, and she stayed. Not because she had nowhere to go, because by November that first year she could have gone. The Missouri option was still there. She stayed because she chose to, because she looked at what I was and said that's enough and meant it, and went on choosing it every day since in the way a good woman chooses things, quietly, certainly, without requiring to be thanked for it. There's a thing that happens when you've been alone a long time, and you know your own worth is somewhere south of what it should be. When the years and the solitude and the work and the silence have worn the edges off your sense of what you deserve. You stop accounting for it. You carry it like a pack you've stopped noticing the weight of. And then someone sees it. Not the work, not the badge, not what you've done, you, the particular man inside all the rest of it. And she says, that's the one, that's who I'm staying for. I can't explain what that does to a man. I could try for another hour and not get it right. It's not soft, and it's not a small thing, and it's not what you'd expect after all those years of solitude to still be capable of feeling. It's just her hand in both of hers by the fire. It's just Ada in the kitchen garden in the October light, looking up at the sky, going back to the work. She's coming in now. She's got a bundle of dried sage in her hand, and she's looking at the house the same way she looked at it that first afternoon I drove her out here, measuring, accounting, deciding what she thinks of it, deciding it's enough, deciding she's staying. I think I'll put this down and go help her with the door.